At $200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Now you're playing with power, superpower. You're the king, I tell you! The king!
Only for Super NES.
Only on Super NES.
You're listening to the SNES Podcast with your host, Soulblazer.
Hello, everybody. This is the Super NES Podcast, episode number 267. These are your hosts, as always. I'm Greg. He is Joe.
Hello.
And today we're covering, I think these are games we also initially had for our possible bad game episode list, Joe, if I remember correctly. But
Yep.
Given the franchise this is attached to, I kind of figured maybe, and also finding out there was a second game, I figured it made more sense to give these games a fair shake in their own episode because there is enough, I think, stuff going on here with them and about them to warrant this. So this would be an interesting episode for sure. So probably the topic's not going to be too interesting to most of our listeners out there, but we'll do our best to try to keep this as entertaining and interesting for you as possible to talk about these games, because we're covering today the Barbie games for the Super NES, which there was one released game called Supermodel, and there's one apparently almost finished but unreleased game called Vacation Adventure. So we're going to be covering these games and a little about the franchise itself here. Obviously, Joe, I imagine you're probably the same boat I was, where you knew about these games' existence, but never touched them for obvious reasons. So,
Yeah.
So, anyway, we probably don't need to explain what Barbie is. If you're interested in history, because the history of the Barbie actually is very interesting. Seriously here. So, if you're interested in that, there are numerous podcasts, YouTube videos, documentaries out there that you can go to for a deeper dive on it. So we'll give a real quick a summary of the history about the history of the doll, because initially it was a doll. Obviously, Barbie since then has branched out into its own multimedia franchise with all kinds of accessories, toys, and whatever. So Barbie was originally created back in 1959. So the original creator, this woman named Ruth Handler, who saw her daughter Barbara playing paper dolls, which was customary at the time period. So, and at the time, most children toy dolls out there were representations of infants or very young kids. So she realized, maybe there's a need in the market for dolls who look more adult. And she also figured that since my daughter enjoyed playing with these paper dolls and dressing them up and whatnot, maybe other kids would too. So her husband was a co-founder of Mattel Toy Company, one of the two big massive toy companies out there these days. Being Hasbro. He wasn't interested. He wasn't really interested in the idea, though. So it kind of sat on the shelf for a few years until they went to a trip, took a vacation to Europe, and saw a German toy doll that kind of was what she had in mind. So she used that. She brought it back to the States. She convinced her husband to give it a shot. The doll was originally introduced in 1959. Expectations were low, but the doll sold really well that first year, and pretty much the rest is history. So the German toy company did eventually sue Mattel for copyright infringement and other stuff. That case was settled out of court, and eventually Mattel just bought the rights lock, stock, and barrel from them in the first place. So to avoid that problem happening again. So Barbie has then turned into a huge franchise over the years. Its popularity has definitely waxed and waned over the years, as of most long-standing toys. Some years being more popular than others. Obviously, the doll is very popular right now because of the recent movie, which definitely was a success. I believe they're making a sequel to the movie. Actually, I remember reading something about that recently. So
they are.
I'm not surprised. So.
Yeah.
So Barbie is probably the most profitable toy that Mattel has in their catalog right now. Back in the early 80s, when Mattel tried getting into the video game market, like the Mattel television, the video game crash in 1983 and 1984, and the resulting failure of the television in the market almost sunk Mattel, almost to the point it had to file for bankruptcy, because the losses were so huge. It was Barbie that kept the company alive during those lean years. So, to say the company depends upon Barbie at a huge amount is not an understatement. So, and there also was the marketing genius that somebody there also realized that, boys may be interested in playing with dolls too, but obviously we can't call them dolls. We'll call them action figures instead. So, make them all macho for the boys and whatnot. So, whoever came up with that original idea was also a genius. But because really, really, action figures are just basically dolls. Just because they can do almost the exact same things with them that you can with Barbie dolls. It obviously with the success of Barbie, it was only been a matter of time before Barbie branched out in the video games. As well too. The first Barbie video game was made by Epix for the Commodore 64 back in 1984. It was also kind of a platformer game, like most of the Barbie games of the time period and of the games occurring today were. It didn't sell very well, so the idea pretty much went by the wayside for quite a while until eventually the idea revived again. The early 90s, High-Tech Expressions got the rights to publish Barbie games, and so they commissioned Barbie for the NES 1991, and also a kind of spiritual sequel spin-off game called Game Girl for the Game Boy in 1992. Neither game reviewed very well, but they sold very well, for sure. So, in modern contemporary opinion about these games is the sense that maybe the reviewers were a bit too harsh on the games because, the fact that they obviously are very simple games, aimed for kids, whatever. But as far as, but Imagineering, who did the developer for the company for the games, was experienced developers. They knew what they were doing. The games were very competent. So, most people look upon the games more favorably now than what the reviews of back then kind of thought about them, for sure. So, I'll talk about High-Tech Expressions here, a little bit because we haven't dealt them before. They were founded in 1986. They originally were known for making business software and greeting card software. The time period, they eventually started branching out into the video game markets in the 80s. High-Tech Expressions was one of the companies that always believed in licensing properties and then hiring companies to develop the games for them on the cheap. They never actually made anything. They never actually made anything themselves. They always just licensed out properties. For a while, that worked. However, the rather poor quality of a lot of their games started showing through. Eventually. They closed the doors. Back in 1995. And like I said, since a lot of their catalog was licensed game, there's a lot of shovelware here for sure. So they made a lot of Disney games, Sesame Street games, games based upon TV shows, game shows, movies. Most of their games not very good. There are some games. There are some games that they published that that I'm sure I thought of very highly today. The Chess Master series, for example, is a still around franchise for learning how to play chess. That's still very popular popular game these days for sure. They published some of the some of the Where in the World games, for example. So the fact that they did most of, obviously, like I said before, the fact that most of their software is licensed means that they didn't always care about quality. So a lot of their games were dubious in quality at best. I mean, there definitely are some good games here, but it's not hard to understand why they went belly up after a while. But anyway, getting to our games we're talking about today. Based upon how popular that the Barbie, NES, and Game Boy games were, High Tech Expressions decided to make a Super NES Barbie game as well too. So they contracted out to Software Creations, who we already have talked about before in this podcast. I won't go into detail about them. To make a Super NES Barbie game, which became Barbie Supermodel, which came out not only for the Super NES, also Genesis and PC and PC like 1983. So let me start off by saying that obviously these games are not meant for us. What we think about these games is going to be way different from what somebody who was the target audience for these games 30 years ago was to begin with. So I try to go in these games, keep that in mind as much as possible, and try to keep it, try to keep it in mind as much as possible. So when I talk about the games, I'm going to basically talk about them from two different aspects. What I thought of the game personally, and what I liked and didn't like, and also, also in the mindset of what somebody who was target audience for this game back 30 years ago probably would have thought about the game. So, another important thing I think a point to bring up is that Barbie games obviously were designed for girls, since the Barbie dolls were obviously made primarily for girls. At the time period. Back in the 90s and also 2000s to a degree, game companies really felt they had to make games and cater games specifically for women gamers, because the perception was that women just don't game, period. And they wanted to try to do what they could to get women into the game market as much as possible. To give an example, the very popular arcade games Miss Pac-Man and Millipede were created in part to appeal to women gamers and try to get women to play those games to begin with. So, The research now shows that women have always played games along with guys, almost the same rate as the guys do, and many times often the same games, but they weren't being open about it for various reasons. The research just did not do a good job of exploring this fact. So nowadays, very few games are actually put out there front and center as being specifically for girls. I mean, yes, there are still some games out there you could find that are that may be heavily leaning toward the market, but nobody's going to outright say this game is specifically made for such and such audience. So, because there's also a very popular belief these days, and again, this whole topic that you can go into a deep dive on with articles and videos and whatever, that the whole argument if should games be accessible to all gamers, or is it okay for games to appeal to certain audiences? For example, I have tried to play the Dark Souls games. I bounced off them big time because I just found them to be way too difficult. I appreciate the games for what they are. I think they're, I think they're very good games, well-designed games, but they're not for me. They're not for, they're not for somebody of my sensibility. And there's a whole debate going on out there about is that okay? Should games be made towards certain audiences? That kind of whole stuff. So this kind of ties in that as well too. The Barbie games were specifically marketed to not just little kids, but also toward girls. And as a result, you have a whole bunch of stereotypes, a whole bunch of assumptions, a whole bunch of questionable game design, I think, because the design, I think, because the developers were going to this mindset of needing to do this, that 30 years from now, we could step back and say, that was a really stupid idea that they had to do that. So, again, that's going to cover our experiences talking about these games in large part, I think. But the developer... Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention, because I had to look. Just so you know, a new Barbie game drops in 3 days for modern consoles and PC. And it is still very much marketed towards little girls, so it's called Horse Trails, and clearly, but it's also trying to get that more mature gamer as well, because it is an open world adventure. And actually, it was funny because one of the reviews I saw mentioned that it feels like Breath of the Wild, which is wild in general. But so Barbie games have come quite a ways. Are they top tier? No, they've never been. I don't think they ever will be. Watch Horse Trails will prove me wrong as far as history goes, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah. There is I agree with that mostly. There is a big exception. So, I guess I'll talk about it now since that came up. So, these Super NES games, Super NES games, I should probably say, spoiler, again, sold very well, but didn't review very well. We'll get the actual review scores later on. So, it was the next game that came out in the Barbie franchise, however, that I talked about with you before, Joe, I think off mic. Fashion Designer 1996, that was a huge success that basically just brought Barbie into this actually is a good game franchise. The Barbie games came out fast and furious after that point. Because Fashion Designer was just pretty much a PC game where girls could actually design their own dresses for Barbie dolls and print them off at home using a printer, make their own dolls. And that was huge for the time period because it's being able to use this program to create your own outfits, like their dolls, and customize them to your heart's content. That was mind-blowing for 1996. So,
yeah, and I mean, we'll get into this with the Super Nintendo games, but I believe that's one of the reasons, that Fashion Designer blew up and then games afterwards followed suit. It's, it's the the ability to customize Barbie, which is the appeal. It's just like playing with the doll in your living room, except for you're doing it with a controller. And, these, at least one of these games attempted to do that. So I give it props for that, and we'll get into that. But, there was definitely still a lot of experimentation that needed to be done, because the NES game was, I guess, okay as a platformer for what it was. The Game Boy the Game Boy game felt like a smaller version of that NES game.
Which it was designed to do in the first place, so.
Right. And then Supermodel's technically the first real sequel, if you really want to get into it. And yeah, I mean, we'll get into it, but yeah, you can see that they were put out there kind of like burning money, let's burn money now so that down the line we can make money, sort of thing. And I think it just didn't work out for High Tech, unfortunately. Yeah. But which, by the way,
developers didn't.
Sorry. Yeah. One of the other things I just wanted to spit out real quick. So High Tech went out of business in 1995. Vacation Adventure was supposed to release sometime in 1995. So one of the things we had discussed before we went off mic last time was, why did this not end up coming out? And that's kind of what I found out, is that basically High Tech went belly up, and instead of putting it out and making whatever money they could, they were just we'll scrap it, and it's a tax write-off.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah.
So the second game we're going to be covering, Vacation Adventure, I could not find anything online confirming that. The developers, interviews the developers themselves also said they don't even know why the game's canceled, because the game was pretty much finished. I mean, the ROM, the ROM for both the Genesis Super NES version of the game is floating around out there. It's pretty much done. I think maybe there was still a small bit of fine tuning to be done the game still before final release. But because software Creations said they lost £10,000 on the project. Since the game never came out. But anyway. They themselves were not sure why the game never got released. I think your theory is the most likely, is the most likely explanation. But again, the game was almost done. Somebody else could have picked the game up and released it if they wanted to. Obviously, nobody felt the game was viable enough to do so, despite the fact it was almost complete. But anyway, so one last point I wanted to bring up. Speaking of the developers, they didn't mind working on this game. Software Creations was a pretty young company at the time. There were a bunch of, there were a bunch of people who worked for them who were brand new hires. Or their second project, and they're like, hey, this is a chance for us to get our feet wet, kind of like, this experience for us, to get working the system, to get working on property. They said that working with Mattel was very easy. Mattel gave them a lot of freedom to work the property. There were a few restrictions. Barbie couldn't be killed. Barbie couldn't kill anything. Whatever. The typical stuff. But beyond that, they had a lot of freedom to work with it, which we know from some other tie-ins wasn't always the case. Right. So, the developers felt they had the freedom to do what they wanted to do, which definitely inspired what we have here in these games. So, I would just say real quick, Super Mario basically is just an improved version of the NES game for sure. I mean, it's still an action platformer game. There's still various stages. There is second player support added for this version of the game, which is nice. Being able to play 1 or 2 players is always a nice touch, but it pretty much is just an expanded version of what already was released, which is like I said, the NES games sold well, even though they may not have reviewed well. So I don't blame the developers for being like, okay, let's just make an expanded version of this. But anyway, having said all that, Joe, and this is why I felt. And this is why I wanted to get this game its own episode, because how long did it take me to explain all that background? Anyway, having said all that, Joe, how much did you dislike or tolerate Super Mario as you're playing it?
Well, so spoiler, I beat both games.
Not hard to do.
Correct. It is not hard to do. So, and I did play on Super Model difficulty. I did not play Junior Model.
Okay. Yep.
So there is that. So there's 4 levels altogether, and there's generally 3 mini games that you deal with in those levels with various coats of paint. So you start off the game. You are in Hollywood. You're in Barbie's Corvette. So that's one of the things you'll see here is that theming. Mattel would have had dolls at the time that represented the ones that you control in the game, as well as the vehicles, because not only do you see Barbie's Corvette, but someone is driving around Barbie's Porsche, which I remember was a thing at that time. I do have 2 younger sisters, so I dealt with a lot of Barbie at this time. So the car game. And, I didn't make note of the buttons. I want to say it was X. You push X or A, and it would speed you up or, slow you down. You basically there to collect hearts with bees, which is essentially your hit points. And then you would have stars, one with a B and one that's just blue, that you would pick up. And those would count for bonus points. Traffic that you're dealing with in Hollywood, I can see why people don't like to drive in Hollywood. They're out to get you. So I get it. We can't kill Barbie, but we can definitely cause a major traffic accident with her. After you do that, there's a section where you'll be shown a magazine cover with Barbie, and you will have to memorize that magazine cover. And then you will have to go through a bunch of outfits and colors to match that picture that you saw. And I will tell you, multiple times, I did not even like recognize like what outfit she was wearing. And then it just became a guessing game. So I will admit that I did have to roll through this game 3 different times to finally beat it because I kept not having enough points to beat it, and it just kept saying try again, which was kind of frustrating. Anyways, after you match the outfit on the magazine, you'll learn your strut and twirls for a runway that you will encounter later on. So initially, I see it. It's like A, then you got to push down on the D-pad, A, down on the D-pad, all right, yeah, down on the D-pad again, and then it was like left, and then whatever, a couple letters and up and whatnot, and then, you essentially do your runway thing. I did not know where that was heading, so I did it, I got through it, didn't memorize it. This is going to be a theme where I just, it's trial and error, but yeah, so, so then you're, getting out of that, you're kind of in the Barbie car again. At some point you can pick up like it looks like a makeup bag, and you're kind of once again confronted with the magazine motif. This time it's going to be Barbie space. You got to memorize, colors and shapes of earrings and whatever else, and then you go through and you get to do the matching for that, and hopefully your memory serves you well. Once you do that, then you're on the runway. Now there's stars on the stage. You don't have the buttons that you're supposed to be pushing or the directions, so hope you remembered what you were shown earlier. But once you get that, that'll complete the level. You'll be given the bonus points based on, matching the things that you matched on the magazine covers for both of the mini games for the magazine covers, and those blue stars that I had spoke about. And then it's really rinse and repeat for the next 3 levels, which was kind of annoying. But so the next,
at least the locations are different, so I'll give you that much.
So yeah, so the next level you're roller skating at the beach. And I think this one started with the Headshot magazine rather than the other one. I think
you're right. Yeah.
And again, once you pass it, you learn your strut and your twirls. It's literally rinse and repeat. It's just the change of the setting. So then you have the ski resort. I don't think I need to explain any further. And then the last stage, you're on a bike in a park, and you can probably guess it, what you got to do and what needs to be done. Overall, I mean, I get what they were going for. They had the mini games to kind of do the game thing, but this is kind of working towards that fashion designer that's going to be successful in a couple years. And
you mean the bonus round?
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So, like, the magazine things, like where you can dress Barbie and you can add, the makeup and everything else. Like, it totally makes sense why, this would have been at least somewhat successful with young girls at the time. Especially since, the older brothers already got one of these things sitting in the living room, right? Taking up the TV. So you might as well get something that you can use on it. Right. I think the biggest issue I had with this game, and it isn't so much like the repetitiveness of it, but yes, that's obviously a part of it, but it's a kid's game. Like Greg said, you got to take into account that this is for children, and we're talking children probably 10 and under, somewhere between that age range, maybe 5 and 10. I can't imagine much older, but maybe. And, it's a little bit better than what we got on the NES. That's where Greg and I are definitely going to differ. I think that game was pretty brutal. It was bare bones for the NES. But that being said, Barbie's got to walk before she can run. So, you got to take the good with the bad. Overall, decent presentation. The graphics are a mixed bag here. You definitely get some large sprites when you're doing Barbie's outfits and all that. The cars look okay. You can, like I said, you can recognize the Barbie Corvette. You can recognize the Porsche. The biggest thing for me was like Barbie's sprite, like when she's in action, and the sprites that she encounters, and some of the settings are just kind of like, I don't know, it's like muddy. It's not really as detailed and colorful as those real close-ups are. But, sound effects are okay. Music's serviceable. Overall, as Greg stated, and I will reiterate, like, this game is not for us, especially now in our 40s. This game is definitely not for us. And, the repetitiveness of it doesn't help either. So, yes, I sound critical of the game because I am, but if I put myself in the mind of a young girl in, the early 90s, I probably would have eaten this up, in all fairness.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a good analysis. I do agree with most of that. I do think I do really like the fact they did try to mix up the gameplay modes a little bit in this one, because you do have, yes, it's repetitive, but you do have at least have some variety of gameplay options here So, in the normal versus easy difficulty, the normal versus easy difficulty settings are also very nice because easy skips out the side view levels altogether and it just gives you the matching game.
Yeah.
It doesn't that's not very. Yes, that allows very, very young kids to be able to play this game for sure. So, and you can always compete against somebody else in second player mode as well too. So, basically, I think this game is just an improvement like on the NES game, like in every single way. Joe and I will disagree about the NES game, but this game. It's not that radically different from the NES game, but the improvements they made to it still make for a much more better polished product for sure.
Yeah.
So, obviously nowadays, I can't recommend this game to anybody. Even Barbie fans, there are better modern Barbie games out there for sure. Yeah. So than this one is. Really, the only reason I just playing this game is, if you have a little kid who's into Barbie, because this game's still okay for them, I think. But even then, still probably not for very long, because like I said, there are better Barbie games out there. So. Probably going to be ignoring it. This, however, is a good transition game because it improves upon the earlier games, and it also continues to help lay down the foundation for the later games in the franchise that were to come in later years.
Yeah.
So I do think this game is important in that regard. And again. This game suffered the same fate as the earlier games. Didn't review the greatest, but sold very well, for sure. So, Nintendo Power, for example, gave 2.8 out of 5. GamePro gave it 2.5 out of 5. For example, just average scores. So, but again. Those people are not the target audience for these games, I think. Right, That's why the games sold very well, because people, parents bought the games for their kids. Like Joe was saying, to have something for them to play as well too, also. So, right. Barbie was just as known then as it is now. So, the name alone carries a lot of weight to it. So nowadays, Mattel carefully guards the franchise very carefully. Is much more restrictive as to who they give out the rights to. But they're not as loosey goosey about their golden goose now as they were like 30 years ago, but still, the name alone carried a lot of weight to it, which would really help the sale. So, and also explains why a sequel, another game, was wanting to be worked on as soon as possible to keep capitalizing upon this. So
yeah, and you also have to keep in mind the society in general was just different at that time. So
sure, yeah.
We had TV, you know what I mean? You could have TV without having a cable box, which is a little harder to do nowadays. Your Saturday morning cartoons were like a staple, and Barbie commercials would bombard you. Even if I didn't have two younger sisters, I would know who Barbie is. I would know the accessories that she would have and what was available. Barbie and the Rockers was literally created to compete with Hasbro's Gem and the Holograms. And they tried to do a cartoon and everything in the mid 80s. So they were pushing hard to get, Barbie mainstream and in the conscious of everybody's mind. When you thought of a doll, they wanted it to be the way it was with video games. No matter what system you had, your mom probably told you, you can go play your Nintendo, whatever system it was, because Nintendo was synonymous with video games.
Sure.
Barbie was synonymous with Barbie-type dolls. It didn't matter if it was a knockoff for $5. It was still considered a Barbie doll. So, yeah, I just, wanted to kind of stick that out there, because nowadays, you don't get that exposure. We don't have Saturday morning cartoons anymore. Everything's on demand now. It's just it's different.
Yeah, for sure. So like I said before, the doll's popularity waxes and wanes over the years, depending upon certain factors.
Right.
For example, the movie for sure gave it a huge boost. But it's you really don't see. You really don't see Barbie advertised the same way now that it was it was back then.
Right.
It wasn't just TV either. You also had comic book ads. And foods. There were licensed Barbie foods out there too.
Yep.
So, and hey, some of the collectors nowadays are also a huge factor of the market as well too.
Oh, yeah.
Some of the Barbie dolls go for huge amounts of money.
Yep.
So, if you have one of those original dolls, I think, good shape, it's worth quite a chunk of change. So it just goes to show the power it made. The franchise may not be as much. The franchise may not be as much in your face now as it used to be, but it still has a lot of blatant power behind it that's driving those high sales and high sales, high demand. So every year Mattel's coming out with a new line of dolls with tweaking this, tweaking that, or changing this around or whatever to try to to keep interest high and sales strong and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So including video games.
I was going to say Mattel's celebrating 80 years this year.
Yeah.
And the big focus on that 80-year has been Masters of the Universe, of course, which was their other cash cow, and Barbie. And they've been releasing, special edition stuff all year so far. So, it's clearly still a thing. And I can tell you a lot of those Barbies, even today, are selling out.
And straight in the collector's hands.
Yep.
Not for kids.
Correct.
They're for collectors. So, but... it's interesting to see how much the market changed. How much the market changed since then. But
I purchased my first Barbie doll this year because they announced and released a She-Ra 40th anniversary Barbie doll.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And if you don't know, I've said it before. I have a very public Facebook. I collect Masters of the Universe stuff, and She-Ra is obviously a part of that. So when this popped up, I was like, well, not a Barbie collector, but it falls into my wheelhouse. So,
exactly right.
And it won't ship until sometime almost next year around my birthday. But hey, you know what? The first time they dropped it, it sold out. So the minute it was available again, I said, I'm getting it. So, yep.
Yeah. It's Yeah, it's interesting to see how the market's really changed like since then, because I'm sure like many of the kids who played Barbie back then are probably same adults still buying them today.
Yeah, they're my age
reasons.
buying them.
So yeah, right, yeah. So yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, the market's changed in those ways.
Yep.
It's very interesting for sure. But anyway, there are no cheat codes to this game. Surprise, surprise. So we'll cover pricing here. Like at the end. So as mentioned before, they did want to make another Barbie game to capitalize on the success of the first game. So Vacation Adventure was worked on. As mentioned before, the game was pretty much ready for release. Just some final polishing to do. It was a game planned for Genesis, Super NES, and there are ROMs for both systems. Floating around out there. Planned for release in 1995, didn't come out. Probably because high-tech expressions went under, even though nothing online confirms that. So this, however, is a different game than the. I'm surprised to see how different this game was compared to the last game, because it actually is. It's more of a side-scrolling platform game straight up than the last game was. Joe, do you want to talk about this game for us?
Yeah. So, Barbie's actually going on an adventure here. So, like Greg hinted at, we kind of get a side scroller here. There's so first off, you start off with a map. You got 5 locations laid out on the map. Each of these 5 locations have little mini games, and also usually have some other thing associated with them. So first thing before you enter a destination, and that's after you select wherever you're going, you get to dress Barbie in whatever outfit you want her in. So this goes back to the whole, being able to customize Barbie. That's what little girls want. That's what they're pushing here. So the 5 locations we have is Iowa, Wyoming, Florida, Texas, and California. And pretty random spots on the map. My assumption is that because of the icons that they use and how big they are, they didn't want to use a bunch of states that were close together, which is how we got this spattering of states that were selected. But also, there's different regional stereotypes and whatnot that kind of play a factor as well. So anyways, Iowa, you got your farms. They want to push the country carnival. So first thing you got to do is you got to grab a pig. Once you grab the pig, which, super easy. You just walk over to the pig, press X. You'll see a bunch of NPCs that you can press X on and be able to talk to. Walk to the right, and there is a ball throwing minigame where you throw the ball at some cans. You also have like a fishbowl they want you to throw it at, a whistle, things like that. It'll progressively get faster, and they did a good job, honestly, with this portion of the game, and this goes into for another throwing game that they have on this level too, where like you have to throw it in a clown's mouth. Like you have to actually aim at the cans before the cans. So you have to include the momentum that is already happening with the cans on the conveyor belt before you throw the ball. So that was actually kind of nice. I wasn't expecting to have challenge in the game, so that was a welcome addition. The other mini game that they have is a test of strength. Grab the mallet, hit the thing, and have it soar up. And I didn't notice like getting anything other than a score when you beat, or quote unquote, beat these different states and mini games. And then obviously these 5 locations will feed into a final score. Second, I went to Wyoming. This is a camping theme. Makes sense. There's a lot of national parks there. You have to set up a tent. It's like a matching game. You just kind of like rotate different pieces and whatnot. There's also a walk through a park, which felt a little bit like a broken version of Pitfall. Like, again, I give them credit for trying to make a adventure game here. But yeah, I think there was still some testing that needed to be done with this game, which again goes back to my theory with why it didn't end up getting released. But also, I didn't harp on a lot of the broken stuff because of the fact this is technically unreleased. So therefore, it probably went through like alpha and beta testing, but never went through final testing. Like, I honestly expected at some point that I was going to run into a bug and it was just going to lock up, just because that's my luck. But thank God that wasn't the case. And then there is like a kind of a take the picture kind of thing for the other minigame. And at that point, you're just, taking the camera and shooting whatever moves, taking a picture of it. Florida was kind of boring, if I'm going to be honest. So you play volleyball. Cool. That took forever. It was the slowest version of Pong I've ever played. The ball was super floaty and it was just slow and like computers matching you. You know what I mean? So it's just like, it's really a test of patience. Who's going to falter first? You or the computer? And then they had a scuba diving section where like you have to collect, and the one I did was like 200 pieces of like treasure. And that's treasure loosely, because like you pick up diamonds, which is initially what I started grabbing. But then I realized as much as that was dropping my count, I noticed I'd pick up stars every once in a while and that would drop my count as well. And then at the bottom of the map, there's also like treasure chests and things of that nature. So that one was kind of annoying, having to try to find everything. Especially like it's not hard. Like, the level's pretty decently laid out. Yeah, they got some dead ends, but nothing major, and there's plenty of pickups to be able to like reaffirm your like your breath. So like you're not gonna run out of breath, and obviously because Barbie can't die. Anyways, so yeah, so plenty of pickups and whatnot. It's tests your patience. Not as bad as volleyball, but it tests your patience. I went around the map, I wanted to say like 3 or 4 times trying to get one treasure to be able to finish that level. It was annoying. Anyways, once Florida is in your back seat, I went to Texas, which is a Western ranch. This is probably, this one and the next one, California, are in my opinion, it's 2 of the worst that are here. And it could be because, again, unfinished game, maybe not. But in Texas, the Western Ranch, you have 3 horse colors. You start with a white horse, a brown horse, and then a black horse. And obviously they're the difficulty, so it starts off easy, then goes medium, a little bit harder, and you're just jumping obstacles. And it's really a timing thing. You just got to figure out the timing of it. And you got 5 mistakes to make. After you make those 5 mistakes, I don't know, horse dies because Barbie can't. I don't know. But she's got to restart either way. And then the last one is California. This is your home. You have guests who have hid presents because it's your birthday, I guess, and you have to find them because your friends are not cool. So they hide your gifts on you. And then the even crueler thing is that you can't just open these gifts. Now you have to guess who gave you the gift. And then once you do that, there's a little cutscene with Ken and whatnot. And again, I cut out a lot of the what I would call BS in the game, but like you can talk to every NPC. There is a bit of coherent story for each little section, but like there's not enough there. It honestly, beyond the gameplay. So you go through the 5 levels, you get your general accumulation score, and then that will rank whether, you did good or not. I didn't get to try again. I didn't, it wasn't anything that it seemed like I did anything bad. So, I'm calling it a win. I think the graphics here are a little worse than Supermodel, but again, I'm not going to hold it against this game because of the fact that it's unfinished. So maybe that's something they would have went back later on and added those details. That's very possible. Other than that, sound effects are there. I think the music in this game is actually the best part of the game. Whoever did the music for this game, literally was like, you know what? Like, this main track needs some bass line, and just like put down this killer bass line, and like it could fit into like an actual like action adventure game. It just happens to be on Barbie Vacation Adventure. But yeah, I'll just get all this out now. Ultimately, the game wasn't released, and we weren't meant to play this, so it feels wrong to sit there and be like, oh, well, there were hit detection issues, and, graphics were muddy and whatever else. We don't know if this was, ready to go or what. Like, we have the assumption because we have a finished ROM, quote unquote. But I don't think I've ever seen anything where anybody was like, it was 100% done.
It was close enough to the point that it was reviewed in magazines, so the fact that it got reviewed makes me think it was very, very close to being released.
Yeah, but see, we've known that they've, sent prototypes to game reviewers as well, and, what I mean, had those reviewed. So, yes, I agree with what you're coming with, but, yeah, I don't know. I mean, ultimately, it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this thing. We are not the target audience for this, and we never were, and we're never going to be. Though I don't know if Horse Trails ends up being the Breath of the Wild of Barbie. I might have to check it out. That being said, I mean, you could probably, and we're going to obviously get into this, but like you could probably pick these up for a couple bucks. I can't imagine that they, like if you're trying to complete your collection, I'm sure these are the games that are like the last ones you're going to pick up because that they're readily available. They're probably under $10, maybe even $5. And, you could probably get a complete in box for less than $50. I could be wrong, but, definitely the Vacation Adventure. I'm sure there's repos out there for at least 20. So, if you wanted to play.
There actually wasn't any that I could find.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so which goes to show how to demand there is there is for this, I guess. But,
yeah. So I mean, that's where I weigh in on this. What about you, Greg?
I agree with most of what you said for sure. It's hard to say. I think this is pretty close to being released because it was, like I said, sent to magazines for review. Was talked about. He was talking about like online, et cetera, So it's hard to say for sure. Yes, I think they probably could have fixed a couple of issues between this and final release. Who knows for sure? But I actually like this game a little. I actually like this game a little bit better than the last one because I thought it was like a very different game.
Yeah.
It felt more. It felt more in tune with what Barbie was. If that makes sense. It kind of played more of like Barbie's strengths and what she is as a as a doll. So I thought the graphics were a little bit better overall. Actually, to me. So and the fact you actually can ride horses in Wyoming is also a nice touch. I thought. So they were experimenting. Yeah. So I give this I give this credit. Had this been released, it probably would have sold pretty well too. So, but yeah, it's always interesting. It's always to check out these almost finished games because we don't get this too often. But the few cases that we do, you definitely can say like, well, what might have happened, what's going to need to be finished, that kind of stuff. But I think this game would have sold pretty well if it had come out.
Yeah.
It reviewed fairly well. Video Games Computer Entertainment, for example, gave 6 out of 10. So, GamePro also gave it the same, middling average score for as well too. So, and you actually are able to play against second person directly this time, as opposed to handing the controller off. It looked like compared to the last game as well, so that was also a bonus. So, it's very different Barbie game for sure. I do appreciate that. I do appreciate the fact this game is different than the last game was. Yep. The games would be different. The games are different enough that people would want to buy both those games for like the kids, for example.
Yeah.
Overall, again, I agree with you. Yes, I agree with you for the most part, Joe. For what it was trying to do, decent enough game. Not worth playing today, and certainly not our target audience. Right. But definitely a game that probably should have been released. I think. It's unfortunate. That's unfortunate that they get finished. Yeah. I don't think it's a terrible game. I think simply again, if you look at it from the proper mindset, this game's pretty good for what it was trying to do.
Yeah.
So anyway, I already mentioned the fact that I could not find any repros of this on eBay. That doesn't mean you can't find one out there if you look hard enough. That just means that I didn't see any evidence of the one being sold. Because eBay history goes back, I think like 9 days probably. Yeah. I think is what it is. So again, which kind of goes to show as to how little demand there is for it. For Supermodel, you're not far off in the prices, Joe. They're a little bit more expensive than what you thought, but they're still not that bad. 35 copies of the game were listed on eBay. Has been doing research. 14 copies. They sold recently. Again, the numbers reflect the fact that the game sold pretty well back in the day. These prices always include shipping from North America. Card-only prices sold anywhere from $9 to $25. So, not bad. CIB, I only found one copy. One copy it sold recently for $71.
Okay.
Probably the fact it was the only copy out there is why it's sold for a bit more money. Yeah, yeah. But not outrageous for CIB pricing for sure. So, a little bit off the pricing, but pretty good guess on your part for sure. So, anyway, that's the Barbie games. So again, I think like I said, I'm glad we covered this on its own. I thought these games were interesting enough as a window into game design and the market of the time period, what they're trying to do. So interesting time capsules for sure. Next time on the podcast, we're covering a game I've never played before. I picked this game on the list because it sounded very interesting. We're covering a game called Warlock, which I think was based off a movie, if I remember correctly, from when I first did the research like last year on this.
Yes, it is based on a movie that was released in 1989.
So the pictures and description just made it sound interesting. So both of us are going into this game pretty blind. So we'll see what we think of it next time.
Yeah.
If you have any questions, comments, feedback, feel free to leave them on our Facebook page. You also can email me directly to the SNES Podcast at yahoo.com. Joe, how can they reach you?
You can find me on Facebook. I got a very public Facebook. Outside of that, Twitter or X, whatever, at JOESUX30. And, that's me.
Okay, sounds good. As always, we appreciate everybody out there listening. Thank you for giving us some of your time. And stay tuned. We'll catch you again next time. Stay safe, everybody. Be well. Later.
Bye.
Nintendo controls 80% of the video market. But no matter how you play the game, or which game you play, things definitely have come a long way since Pac-Man.
Now you're playing with power. Deep power.